Hello and welcome to GameSack. Today we're taking a look at games for the Saturn, Nintendo 64, and Dreamcast that feature native support for widescreen in one way or the other. Now, the version of this episode for the PlayStation didn't do so well, but that's okay. I want to make this episode anyway because it's something that I wish someone else would have done a long time ago. Anyway, first up, a refresher of what widescreen is and how it works. TV signals back in the day were 4x3, be it broadcast, videotape, or a game system. 16x9 sets that showed up early on just stretched the 4x3 image to fill the increased width. So, proper 16x9 content had to be made to appear squished in 4x3 and then the TV would unsquish it. That's called an anamorphic squeeze. It was the highest quality way to get the wider image at the time, though that meant the horizontal pixel density would be spread over a larger area. TVs could also zoom in on content that was letterboxed, but that meant the image was degraded both horizontally and vertically. You lose a lot of resolution in this process. Modern HD and 4K monitors can also process old 4x3 images in the same ways for your ancient content. Lastly, some video games add more of the image on the sides to achieve a true widescreen, while others will simply crop off the top and the bottom of the image, giving you a zoomed-in look, but technically still widescreen. So as we go along, I'll let you know if the game crops the normal 4x3 mode to achieve the wider aspect ratio or not. Anyway, let's begin with the Saturn. We begin the Saturn section with Baroque from Sting. This is an interesting first-person roguelike or light, which of course brings randomly generated levels with it. You can set it to widescreen in the main options screen, and it is wider with a perfect anamorphic squeeze. No cropping at all. Naturally, this game was only released in Japan, but there is an English translation patch for it. Enemy Zero from Warp. This is a spiritual follow-up to their earlier game called D. It's a science fiction horror game. It's letterboxed, so you'll have to use your TV scaler to zoom it in. The game features both FMV-style adventure scenes as well as polygonal exploration scenes, both using the same aspect ratio. There's no 4x3 mode in this game. I suggest waiting until after you begin the game to zoom in though, otherwise the title screen gets cut off.
Attention. This ship's emergency mode has now been activated.
Next is High Velocity from Cave and Atlas. You race around the mountains in Japan in this one. It's a fairly decent little racing game for its time without any pop-up or draw-in that I've ever noticed. The anamorphic widescreen here is achieved by zooming in and cropping out the top and bottom. Your field of view doesn't increase on the sides at all. So not a huge benefit to play in this mode unless you feel the need to fill the entire 16x9 screen. Masters Harukanaro Augusta 3. This is your typical golf game from T&E Soft. This one was only released in Japan and plays just like any of their other golf games. You can toggle the widescreen mode on and off at any time in the option screen during gameplay. And as you can see, it's actually wider in this mode. They even made sure the 2D bitmapped graphics were accounted for, which is a nice touch. Sadly, this game doesn't have Craig Stadler, but it does have this guy instead.
Beautiful shot. Way to go.
The widescreen mode in this one is definitely the preferred way to play. Nights into Dreams. This is a cool little game, though I personally never understood all the hype. The options mode is a bit more hidden than normal, but there's a widescreen option in there. This is achieved by making the playfield both a bit wider and cropping a bit from the top and the bottom. The anamorphic stretch is a bit too much. If we adjust properly, the game is actually a bit closer to 15x9, but the extra stretch is so minimal so you don't really need to worry much. The sprites like the little blue orbs that you collect aren't adjusted for and are stretched, but you probably won't notice much during gameplay since it moves so fast. Christmas Nights also has this very same widescreen option. Panzer Dragoon 2! This is probably my favorite game in the entire series, and every other game is fantastic as well. You get to evolve your dragon in this one depending on how well you do and what routes you take in the stages. The widescreen mode here is great. It's not cropped at all and even the 2D sprites are taken into account. However, the infinite planes rendered by the VDP2 chip, such as some of the grounds and the skies, are stretched. That's okay though, no one's gonna notice. This is a fantastic widescreen experience all around, but it's an amazing game no matter how you play. If you don't have it, you might want to get the Japanese version as it's much cheaper. This is Pro Yaku Greatest 997 Make Miracle. This is a baseball game which never left Japan. It has a widescreen mode in the options. The game is wider, but the ground graphics are stretched in this scene. After you hit the ball though, the ground graphics are fine. Kind of a half-assed widescreen mode, honestly. Unfortunately, the Western version, called World Series Baseball 98, removed the widescreen mode. Oh well, like I said, it was half-assed anyway. But all of the greatest 9 games that use polygonal players, like Pro Yaku Greatest 9 Summer Action here, have the same widescreen mode with the same results and the same issues. Some people like to say that Saturn Bomberman has a widescreen mode. It doesn't, but the confusion comes from this wide option in the battle mode. Here's the normal mode, and it looks great. Now, here's the wide mode. The only difference here is that the game is interlaced, making everything really small, but you can still see it's very much in the 4:3 aspect ratio as everything still has the same proportions. So, just to set the record straight, this game is not in widescreen. Thank you. Stellar Assault SS. This is a follow-up to the original 32X game called Stellar Assault, also known as Shadow Squadron. This is a really cool game where you do a lot of space flying, Ace Combat style, with plenty of freedom. The game is letterboxed, and there's no 4:3 mode at all, not even in the title screen. So you can just use your TV or your scaler to zoom the image in. Although this was only released in Japan, it has a fantastic English translation, both text and voice. This one is highly recommended.
Eagle 1 to Garuda. I've destroyed the target. Remaining enemy units are retreating. Mission complete.
This is Togue, King the Spirits 2 from Cave and Atlas. Or, as one viewer demanded that I pronounce it, Togu. There, now you can die happy. This racing game is actually High Velocity 2, but it stayed in Japan. I personally enjoyed this game much less than High Velocity, but at least a widescreen mode is much better. While the game is a bit less fun for me, the graphics are better than High Velocity and the music is still pretty good. Wailai no Kiseki Extra 36 Holes. This is another T&E soft golf game that stayed in Japan. And just like Masters Augusta 3, you can select the widescreen mode at any time. The results here are exactly the same, just like you'd expect. Your caddy talks to you in this one instead of Craig Stadler. Pretty exciting.
Sweet Drive.
Lastly, for the Saturn, we have Zen Nihon Pro Wrestling featuring Virtua. Basically, this is a wrestling game that has real Japanese wrestlers and also a couple of characters from Virtua Fighter. It was only released in Japan. The widescreen mode here is achieved mainly by cropping the top and the bottom. The background graphics of the crowd also get stretched horizontally. The droning and repetitive sounds that are supposed to be the crowd make sure that you're always bored and it'll soon make you sleepy, just like GameSack. Okay, now we move on to the Nintendo 64, and it actually has a lot of games that attempt to support widescreen. However, it's often done very weirdly on this particular console for some reason. We start the Nintendo 64 section with Armorines from Acclaim. This is a first-person shooter that never was very popular. There's a high-res LB mode, which of course means letterbox. You can zoom in on this to fill the screen, but it'll still be slightly letterboxed. In fact, a lot of Nintendo 64 games are like this. Unfortunately, this is all achieved by cropping. The expansion pack is also required to access this mode. Army Men Sarge's Heroes from 3DO. This is a good game where you play as the toys that boomers used to enjoy because, well, they didn't have anything else. There's a letterbox mode and the field of view is wider. But if you zoom in on your TV, part of the map will get cut off on the bottom as well as some text in some scenes. Not the best implementation around, but hey, it was a 32-bit generation. What are you gonna do? Army Men Sarge's Heroes 2 has the same letterboxed mode. It doesn't have a map during gameplay that gets cut off, but some graphics and a bit of text between the levels will.
Go!
Banjo-Tooie from Rare. I don't really know what to say about this one except that it's super popular. There's an anamorphic widescreen mode in the options. They did it right, as your field of view is wider and not cropped. Something that is worth a complaint though is the lower frame rate in the widescreen mode. We're talking about 20 frames per second in the normal mode versus 15 frames per second in the widescreen mode for a heavy populated area. The frame rate does vary with how much is on the screen though. Daikatana from Kemco. People say this one has a widescreen mode, but it doesn't really. In order to access it, you'll need an expansion pack and then you'll need to set the video type to high resolution in the options screen. This will letterbox the image, but it doesn't provide a wider field of view and it doesn't even crop the top and bottom, it just squashes it. It also interlaces it. So I can't really say that this game is truly in widescreen. Donkey Kong 64 from Rare. You need the expansion pack for this game no matter what. There's an anamorphic widescreen mode in the options at the start. It is wider, but it's stretched too much on a 16:9 TV. Compensating for the improper amount of squeeze, the game is actually about 14.5:9, which is odd. I can adjust for that with a video scaler, but most TVs won't do a proper stretch on their own. The good news is that the frame rate doesn't suffer noticeably in this mode like it does in Banjo-Tooie. Excitebike 64 from Nintendo. This is another game that people mistakenly think is in widescreen. If you have an expansion pack, you can enable a high-res mode. This interlaces and squishes the screen, but your field of view remains identical. This game is not in widescreen, and like Daikatana, it's just a poor man's version of high resolution. Alright, it's GoldenEye, developed by Rare. Everyone knows about this James Bond first-person shooter. You can switch aspect ratios at any time during the game in the options menu. You have your choice of normal and 16:9. This mode is done perfectly, kudos to Rare. Moreover, there are also wide and cinematic aspect ratios that you can select. This will make your field of view even wider with some pretty extreme letterboxing, especially if you combine it with the 16:9 mode. It's definitely interesting to play like this. Hybrid Heaven from Konami. This game is quite overlooked in my opinion. If you have the expansion pack, you can enable a high-res letterbox mode from the title screen. The widescreen effect is a little wider than the normal mode, but also cropped. So it's both good and bad. But more bad than anything because the frame rate is significantly worsened in this mode. Please, play this one in normal mode only. Jet Force Gemini from Rare, or Gemini as NASA pronounced it in the 60s. This is a great action-adventure game that looks pretty good as well. They even brag about the widescreen mode in the title screen. Enable it in the main options before you begin. This letterboxes the game. You can adjust the screen vertically and you'll probably want to do this as it defaults to being a little too high. After that, you just use your TV or video scaler to zoom in. Your field of view is wider and not at all cropped, though the resolution is much lower and that's just a byproduct of letterboxing versus an anamorphic squeeze. Unfortunately, due to the lower resolution, it can make some of the text a bit harder to read, though never impossible. I'll have to cover this one someday, maybe in an overlooked games episode because I never hear anyone say much about this one. I mean, I'm definitely liking what I'm playing so far. Ken Griffey Jr.'s Slugfest. This is a horribly bad baseball game. Baseball games got way worse in the latter part of the 16-bit era, in my opinion. Anyway, if you have an expansion pack, you can choose a wide resolution before the game, which will letterbox it. And it is indeed wider. But sadly, you're still playing Ken Griffey Jr.'s Slugfest.
Strike!
Mickey's Speedway USA from Rare. This is a cool little Mario Kart clone with Disney characters. The widescreen mode here is just like the one in Jet Force Gemini, which letterboxes the game. It's wider, but with less detail. Personally, I don't think the widescreen adds much to this particular game, and I think I'd prefer the extra vertical resolution, but hey, that's just me. It's a really fun game either way.
Tracer, Tracer! Look out, Goofy! Was that you, Mickey?
Mission Impossible from Ocean. This is one fuzzy looking game, even for the Nintendo 64. You can change aspect ratios at any time during the game in the options. And it is wider without any cropping, and it even has a perfect anamorphic squeeze. Expansion pack not required. Hell, I'm just surprised that it's not letterboxed instead. This next game has a ton of great widescreen modes, in fact more so than its remake on the Xbox 360. Perfect Dark, another one from Rare. You need the expansion pack to even be able to play the game proper. There are a ton of different widescreen modes that you can select from in the options menu at any time, similar to GoldenEye. You can select Wide Mode, which will letterbox the game to 16:9, and then Cinema Mode, which letterboxes it to 2.35:1, which is the aspect ratio that most movies are presented in, otherwise known as CinemaScope. But you can also change the ratio from normal to 16:9, which gives you a proper anamorphic squeeze, offering more vertical resolution than the aforementioned modes. But that's not all. If you engage the wide letterboxing mode here, you get the 2.35:1 aspect ratio, and if you enable the cinema letterboxing, you get an ultra-wide 3.1:1 aspect ratio. It's pretty crazy to play in this mode, but if you love a super wide field of view, you'll love this. Also, isn't it weird how we say aspect ratios? For example, most people will say 2.35:1 for the cinema aspect ratio, but 16:9 for the TV ratio. One viewer brought this up in the comment section of the last widescreen video I did. No one says 16:9, it's always 16:9 and 4:3, but never 2.35:1. Oh well, language is funny. Anyway, this one gives you tons of choices, and it's a great game on top of all that. Road Rash 64 from THQ. This is such a goofy looking game, especially for a Road Rash title, but it's not horrible. The expansion pack will unlock a few different modes which result in letterboxing the image that you can select at any time. The first one, called Wide, gives you an aspect ratio of about 2.1:1. The mode called Letterbox is even wider with an aspect ratio of about 2.66:1. They all result in a wider field of view. The frame rate seems to remain about the same in each of these modes. South Park from Acclaim. Oh man, not this game again. Anyway, the expansion pack will let you choose the high-res letterbox mode. This simply crops off the top of the screen, though it is ever so slightly wider. It's also more distorted from being squished. Oh well, hopefully I'm done with this one until I have an episode dedicated to South Park games someday.
Damn it! Quit it, dildo!
Starshot from Infogrames. I'd say it as Infogram, but come on, French isn't a real language. And I can say that because I'm part French. Anyway, I had never even heard of this game before. You can select 16:9 at any time in the options, and as you can see, it applies an anamorphic squeeze. It does indeed give you a wider field of view. I can't really say much about the gameplay so far, but at least they got the widescreen correct. Stunt Racer 64. I've never heard of this one before either. I mean, I've heard of Stunt Race Effects on the Super NES, but this definitely ain't that. Anyway, this one offers a resolution mode that you can switch at any time. This interlaces and letterboxes the game. It's a smidge wider, but mostly cropped. Superman, or Superman 64 as many people like to call it. What's funny is that this game defaults to a letterboxed mode that's a perfect 16:9. You actually have to go in and fiddle with the options to get a normal 4:3 full screen mode. I can see why the normal mode isn't default, as it's tougher to see where the upcoming rings that you need to fly through are. So yeah, just stick with the game's default settings every time you fire it up, which I'm sure is a lot. Top Gear Overdrive from Kemco. This is a decent little racing game, I think. In the options, setting the high-res mode to half gives you letterboxed widescreen. This is done with severe cropping, and I really don't see any advantage to playing in this mode. But hey, it's there if you want it. I'm going to cover Turok 2, Turok 3, and Turok Rage Wars from Acclaim all in a single segment. That's because each of these first-person games have the same exact options and results. With an expansion pack, you get the option for letterboxing the game. This is cropped a bit on top and bottom, but your field of view is a bit wider as well. The screen also interlaces in this mode. Your frame rate will take a small hit here, but nowhere near as bad as if you played full screen in the high-resolution mode. World Driver Championship from Midway. This is a really good looking game for the console, though it is a bit too dark. Seriously, even on the bright sunny tracks, everything somehow still looks underlit. Why? Anyway, you can enable a high-res mode at any time, which letterboxes the game. This gives you a bit wider view, but also severely crops the top and the bottom of the screen. It also interlaces. I like how the lens flares have an anamorphic stretch in this mode, as if they were shot with an anamorphic lens, even though this game is letterboxing instead of having any anamorphic squeeze. It's a nice touch. Otherwise, this game looks much better in the normal mode in my opinion. Lastly for the console, we have The World Is Not Enough. This is another first-person James Bond game, this time from Electronic Arts. You can access the widescreen mode at the beginning or even from the pause menu. This one offers a wider field of view, which is always good for a game like this. Anamorphic only, there's no letterbox option for this Bond game. The good news is that the expansion pack isn't required for widescreen. Let's finish off the episode with the Dreamcast, and all of the widescreen games here are anamorphic. I think. Well, let's check. We start the Dreamcast segment off with Arrow Wings from Crave Entertainment. This is basically a flight simulator style game. You probably get to have battles and stuff later on, but I've never played the game long enough. Anyway, there's a widescreen option in the main menu. Unfortunately, the aspect ratio is achieved by cropping, which isn't particularly good for a flying game. However, there are still some black bars on the sides, giving this game an effective aspect ratio of about 15.115 to 1. Apologies if anyone gets upset for me not being more precise. You'll see these bars on the sides on a lot of Dreamcast games with widescreen. The sequel, Arrow Wings 2, does not offer a widescreen mode.
Altitude is getting low. Hold back the control stick to ascend.
Donald Duck Goin' Quackers from Ubisoft. This one's a decent Crash Bandicoot clone. You can switch aspect ratios in the main options at the beginning, but not during the game. The game is wider without any vertical cropping. You should totally try this game unless you don't want to. F355 Challenge from Sega and Acclaim. This arcade port only offers a first-person view and Ferrari cars. If you're playing in VGA mode, you can't change the aspect ratio. But in interlaced mode, like if you're using composite or S-Video, you can. I guess maybe they figured no one would have 16:9 VGA monitors. I mean, you can't blame them. Other than that, it's a really good widescreen mode. Even the 2D bitmapped graphics are adjusted for. There are patches for this game which enables the wide mode in VGA. I think I'm going to have to download that.
Time extension.
Giant Gram, Zen Nihon Pro Wrestling 2 and Nihon Budokan from Sega. This Japan-only game is certainly better than the Saturn one, if you can remember that far back in the episode. There's a widescreen mode in the option screen here. Like the Saturn game, the widescreen is achieved by cropping the top and the bottom. The sequel, Giant Gram 2000, also has the same widescreen mode. It was also only released in Japan. Metropolis Street Racer from Bizarre Creations. This is a mediocre racing game from the developers that would later go on to make the much better Project Gotham games. To play in widescreen, you need to unlock it and then enable it in a cheat menu. It's anamorphic, but it's achieved by cropping the top and bottom off of the screen. What's worse is that the more you play, the more stretched vertically it gets. Every race will be worse. Eventually, it's completely unplayable. I can see why they hid this feature away. No proper widescreen for Jew. Rayman 2: The Great Escape from Ubisoft. This is an excellent early 3D platformer for the console that also appeared on the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation. This is the only version with a widescreen mode. Just like the Donald Duck game, you can only engage it in the options at the beginning. And it is indeed wider. This is still a great game even today, and playing in widescreen, it feels really nice and less cramped since I originally played through the whole thing in wimpy 4x3 on an interlaced CRT. Seriously though, this game is fantastic no matter how you choose to enjoy it. Starlancer from Crave Entertainment. This is one of those fly anywhere Ace Combat style of games, but in space! The widescreen mode is accessed right from the main option screen, and it's wider, allowing you to see more of your cockpit and the play field. Some elements of your HUD are stretched though, no big deal.
Great shot! Who do I send the flowers to, comrade?
Test Drive V-Rally from Infogrames, also known as V-Rally 2 Expert Edition. It may not be Sega Rally, but this is still a great rally racing game that moves fast and it has great control. The widescreen option is in the main option screen. And it is wider, and it's definitely nice for this racing game. Tokyo Extreme Racer 2 from Genki. Here's a nighttime racing game that even has somewhat of a quest mode. The widescreen toggle is in the gameplay settings of the main options, and you're prompted to save the settings after changing any of them. The widescreen settings do not work at all in VGA mode, even though it lets you toggle it on and off. It does work in interlaced mode though, just like F355. I'm sure there's probably a patch for this one, but I haven't personally investigated yet. The game is a little wider, but it's stretched too much. Adjusting for it, it's just under 14:9 or so. Toy Commander from No Cliché and Sega. In this inventive game, you play as a child's toy vehicles to accomplish various missions. You can enable widescreen at any time during gameplay, and it's wider without any cropping. The control is very good in this one, but it still takes some getting used to at the same time, if that makes any sense. Still, this one is a pretty good game. Toy Racer from No Cliché and Sega is a follow-up to Toy Commander. This game was only released in Europe and it's strictly about racing. The widescreen is done in the same way as it was in Toy Commander. This is meant to be an online title only, as such there are no opponents if you try to play it in single-player mode. Also, the sound is quite annoying. Trick Style from Criterion. This was their second game, I believe. This futuristic hoverboard game won't run at all in VGA mode, and there's currently no patch as of the making of this video. The widescreen mode is right in the main menu. Unfortunately, this is done by cropping, which can make seeing where you need to go next as you play a lot tougher. I don't have anything more to say about this one. UEFA Dream Soccer from Sega and Infogrames. This title was only released in Europe, yet they still call it soccer. Interesting. The widescreen mode is selectable in any of the various option screens for each style of play. Speaking of which, the menu system in this game is not done very well at all. I don't like it. The widescreen, though, is done quite well. It looks great. Personally, it's hard for me to get into these more realistic style soccer games. They're as difficult to play as real professional soccer.
That's a test for the keeper in the first minute.
It's always nice to get that first touch in. No, that's a waste.
Finally, we have Wacky Races from Infogrames. This is an interesting take on the kart-style racing game genre. You can access the widescreen mode at any time. It is indeed wider and not cropped at all, which is appreciated. And well, that's it. We're done here, except for my final on-camera spiel and the after credits end sketch, which, well, you'll see.
You're in first place!
And there you go, I finally finished covering every game in the 32-bit generation that I can find that has native support for widescreen in some way or the other. And I threw in Dreamcast just for fun because the Dreamcast is awesome. So what do you think about gaming in widescreen? Let me know, and in the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack. Introducing the next level in video game excitement. The Sega 32X. With a complete library of new 32-bit games. 32 times the power. 32 times the colors. 32 times the boredom. The Sega 32X. Because when you're on top, you might as well just ruin everything.